So we'll need our needle tool, our potter's knife, our ribbon tool, and then we'll also be working with some slip that might be out at your table already. So we want to make sure that we have some slip to work with when we start to score and slip. So the very first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the coil technique, because a lot of you will want to use the coil technique. So I'm going to start by cutting maybe a third of my clay off, and I'm going to create a slab base to begin with. So sometimes you'll use rolling pins to create a slab. I'm just going to use my hand, and if I pull my fingers back, you'll see that there's actually a nice solid surface here to press against my clay. So I'm going to start by pressing, and then I flip it. Okay, so this is a pretty good thickness. I wouldn't go much thinner than that. Remember, you don't want to be any thicker than your finger. So now that I have my slab, I'm going to go ahead and set down a template. I have a box of templates over by the sinks. You can pick whatever shape you might need to start with. And so I'm going to start with a circle for a mug. So I'm going to show you how to make a mug. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, and I'll lift up my clay, and so now I have a nice base, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write my name on the bottom of this slab. Then you're going to flip it over. Now we have our slab. The next step that we want to do is we want to create a coil. So I'm going to take my clay that I have as extra clay, and I'm going to wedge it. Wedging your clay is to compress the clay and get any air out of the clay. If there are any air pockets or air bubbles in the clay, they will explode in the kiln. So we want to avoid having any air in the clay. Now I have some nice compressed clay. I'm going to start by squeezing it into a very big coil. Okay, so now that I have the coil, I'm going to start rolling it forward. And coils always, I find it easier to roll them on the table, but since I have the document camera stand in my way, I'm just going to go ahead and roll it here on the canvas mat. But you'll notice some of the issues. Sometimes the mat kind of gets wrapped up in the coil. Now, I want you to pay attention that I'm only rolling it forward. I'm not rolling back and forth. If you go back and forth like this, it starts to flatten the sides of your coil. If that happens, just pinch it back into a more round shape and then start rolling it in one direction. And you're going to apply pressure as you're doing this, and this will force the clay to get longer. So we want a nice long coil to work with. Now, if you start to see a lot of cracks with the clay as you're rolling your coil, it might mean that your clay is too dry. If that is the case, you're going to want to recycle your clay and get some fresh clay from the teacher so that you can continue to build without your clay falling apart on you. So remember, we want to prevent it from going to the leather hard stage by keeping our clay from drying out. So now that I have my coil, I can see that it's going to fit around my base. My next step that I'm going to do, in fact, I'm going to put my cardboard out since I keep seeming to catch that stand. There we go. I'm going to take and I'm going to score it. Now remember, scoring is making little hatching or scratching marks into the surface of the clay. Now, just scoring your project alone will not get the clay to stick together, and you do want to score both items that you're attaching. So I've scored my slab first. Now I'm going to score my coil. So again, the purpose of scoring the clay is to create some grooves that then slip can get into, and when you merge the two items, that will cause the slip to go down into the grooves and create almost a suction that helps to keep the two pieces together. So I'm going to finish scoring this. Okay, next I need my slip. You'll take a wooden tool, dip it in your bucket of slip. Okay, you don't want your slip to be too dry, so if you notice that your slip is drying out, please let the teacher know so she can refill it with some fresh slip. And remember, slip is just water and clay mixed together that has started to turn into kind of a slimy substance, gooey that helps stick the clay together. So now that I have that finished, I'm going to go ahead and press it over my scoring that I had from before. And when it lines back up, I'm going to take and just trim that off. I can even take a moment, score the ends, and press them together. So now I have the start of the base of my mug. Okay, I can take my sponge, dip it in the water. I want to make sure I squeeze it out. We don't want it sopping wet. And I can take and I can smooth along the edge to clean up any extra slip that there might be. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind, if you are planning on eating or drinking from what you are constructing, you need to blend the inside. That means smoothing out any cracks or crevices, because if there's a crack or a crevice or a break in the clay, that gives a chance for bacteria to get into those grooves, and it would make you sick then if you eat or drink from it. But if you take the time to blend it and cover it in glaze properly, these will be usable pieces that we are creating. So I'm going to go ahead and take my finger and I'm just blending it, so I'm just pressing it down. You can also use the wooden tools if that helps as well, and you're just pressing down along that groove. So now I have it blended in. I'm going to take my sponge again and I'm going to go around that inside surface, and I'm going to smooth out where those two pieces of clay are connected. Now remember, you don't want your sponge sopping wet. And I go ahead and I continue to smooth. And I can even smooth out the top of that. Okay. Now you can choose to leave this showing, or you can also choose, if you want it to look like one whole piece of clay, you can also choose to blend the outside of your mug as well. So for the base, I'm going to go ahead and blend around here so it looks like a nice big coil to start with. So I'm going to just take and blend between the base and the first coil, and I can even blend over this seam here that we're seeing where the two coils connect, or the start and the end of the coil connected. And for blending, it helps to blend the direction that has the most clay. So I have more clay on my coil, so I'm blending it down towards the base. If I have any extra here, I can take my needle tool and just kind of trim it off carefully. Then I can come back in. I'm going to rinse out my sponge real quick, squeeze it out so it has some water in it. Now I can come back in. Now I'm supporting my coil from the inside with my hand, and I'm using my sponge to really smooth out that texture that was created by my blending. So now that that's blended, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step.